In April of 1927, a 33-year-old woman stood in a New York courtroom and listened to a judge call her a corrupter of youth. She was sentenced to 10 days on Welfare Island for writing and starring in a Broadway play. On her way out, a reporter asked what she thought would happen next. She said, "I expect this will be the making of me." She was right. The jail sentence that was supposed to end Mae West made her famous in all 48 states. 5 years later, she walked into Hollywood at an age when most actresses were being shown the door. Within a year, she had saved a major studio from bankruptcy. That is the part of the story people know. The rest of it is stranger, sadder, and more interesting. Mae West spent 50 years building a character, and then spent the last 30 of her life unable to step out of it. She was born Mary Jane West on August 17, 1893 in Brooklyn, delivered at home by her aunt. Her father was John West, a prizefighter known as Battlin' Jack, who later ran a livery stable and then a private detective agency. Her mother, Matilda, was a German immigrant who had modeled corsets and dreamed of a stage career her own family forbade. Matilda poured that thwarted ambition into her daughter. She took little Mae to vaudeville houses, made her costumes, and entered her in amateur nights before the girl was 8 years old. The father was rough, and the marriage was cold, but mother and daughter formed a sealed unit that nothing in Mae's life ever replaced. School barely figured. Mae left formal education around age 13 and never went back, and she carried a thick Brooklyn accent and creative spelling for the rest of her days. What she had instead was the stage, and a mother who managed her bookings, drilled her rehearsals, and told her she was destined for something. The performer who shaped her most was Bert Williams, the great black vaudeville star. She watched how he used innuendo and double meaning to slip subversive material past audiences who would have rejected it, stated plainly. That trick became the foundation of everything she did. Her whole career was built on saying one thing and meaning another. As a child performer, she did impersonations of grown vaudeville stars, dressed in pink satin and ribbons. Audiences laughed at the sight of a little girl channeling adult swagger. She learned early that the joke and the provocation could ride in the same sentence. By 1907, she was working professionally, first in a Brooklyn stock company playing child roles, then on the vaudeville circuit as a teenager. There she met a song and dance man named Frank Wallace. In April 1911, when she was 17, she married him in Milwaukee and told almost no one. The marriage collapsed within months, but Mae never bothered to end it. She simply walked away, kept the secret, and lived as a single woman for the next 3 decades. That piece of paper would come back to embarrass her at the worst possible moment, and we will get to that. The 1910s were not kind to her. She bounced between vaudeville, burlesque, and the occasional Broadway revue, billed as a novelty act and never quite breaking through. She caused a stir dancing the shimmy in the 1918 show Sometime, but by her early 30s the bookings were thinning out and the act was getting stale. It is worth pausing on how bleak this stretch was. She had been performing for 2 decades and had nothing solid to show for it, no film career, no signature role, no money to speak of. Plenty of people in the business considered her vulgar, lazy, or both. She was a footnote waiting to happen. In 1925, she decided to stop waiting and wrote herself a part. The play was about a Montreal prostitute named Margie Lamont, and Mae wrote it under the pen name Jane Mast. Her director kept remarking on how sexy the material was, and the word stuck in her head. She threw out the original title and called the play simply Sex. It opened on Broadway in April 1926. The reviews were brutal, and the major papers refused to even print the title in their advertising pages. None of that mattered. The public came in waves, around 325,000 people over the run, including judges, police officials, and a healthy chunk of the district attorney's staff. The play ran for nearly a year without interference. What changed things was her next project, a play called The Drag, about gay men in New York, featuring an actual drag ball performed on stage. She tried it out in New Jersey and Connecticut with a cast of gay performers, and the New York establishment panicked at the idea of it reaching Broadway. In February 1927, the Vice Squad raided Sex and hauled the entire cast off in police vans. The trial that followed was a circus, and Mae treated it as free advertising. When the judge asked if she was trying to show contempt for his court, she answered that she was doing her best to conceal it. She was convicted of corrupting the morals of youth, fined $500, and sentenced to 10 days. She reportedly had the option to pay her way out and refused, because the jail time was worth more than the fine. She served 8 days on Welfare Island, got out early for good behavior, and complained to reporters that the worst part was the regulation cotton underwear. She dined with the warden, took notes on her fellow inmates, and sold a magazine story about the experience. Then she donated the fee to establish a library at the women's prison. Every beat of it was managed like a press campaign, because that is exactly what it was. In 1928, she gave Broadway Diamond Lil, the play that fixed her persona in place for the rest of her life. Lil was a Bowery saloon queen of the 1890s, draped in diamonds, wisecracking, and entirely unashamed of how she got them. The play was a smash, and the character and the woman began to merge. From Lil, she took the costume, the diamonds, the corseted hourglass shape, and the slow drawl. She also took the worldview, that of a woman who had monetized desire and felt no guilt about it. She would still be playing some version of this character 50 years later. The pattern with the law continued. Her play, Pleasure Man, was rated in 1928, and The Constant Sinner was shut down in 1931. Each scandal cost her money, and each one made her bigger. Then, in January 1930, her mother died. People who knew Mae said she never fully recovered, and she said as much herself for the rest of her life. Matilda had been her manager, her confidant, and the one person who knew the woman underneath the act. Mae was 36, famous, and from that point on, fundamentally alone in a way she never advertised. Hollywood came calling in 1932. Paramount was sliding toward bankruptcy in the depths of the Depression, desperate enough to gamble on a stage star with a police record. Mae was 38 years old, an age at which the studio system considered actresses finished. Her first part was small, a supporting role in Night After Night with George Raft. She took one look at the script, declared it terrible, and refused to start until she could rewrite her own scenes. The studio, remarkably, let her. The result is one of the most famous entrances in movie history. A hat-check girl gushes over her jewelry, saying, "Goodness, what beautiful diamonds." Mae answers that goodness had nothing to do with it. Raft later said she stole everything but the cameras. Paramount understood immediately what it had. The studio gave her a starring vehicle and let her adapt Diamond Lil for the screen, retitled She Done Him Wrong, to calm nervous censors. For her leading man, she picked a young contract player named Cary Grant, and the role helped launch him. The film cost about $200,000 and earned over $2 million. Exhibitors credited it with saving Paramount at the exact moment the company was weighing whether to sell out to MGM and convert its theaters into office buildings. It was nominated for Best Picture, and the line where she invites Grant to come up sometime and see her entered the language permanently. I'm No Angel followed the same year, again with Grant, and did even better. By the end of 1933, a woman who had been a fading vaudeville act 8 years earlier was one of the biggest draws in American movies. And she was doing it on her own words, because she wrote her own scripts, which almost no actress in Hollywood could claim. Her dialogue did something nobody else's did. It was quotable on the way out of the theater, and it traveled by word of mouth like a joke. Comedians imitated her, cartoons caricatured her, and the painter Diego Rivera called her the most wonderful machine for living he had ever known. By 1935, the numbers were almost absurd. Mae West earned around $480,000 that year, making her the highest-paid woman in the United States. Only one person in the entire country out-earned her, the newspaper baron, William Randolph Hearst. This was Depression America, and incredibly, audiences standing in bread lines paid their quarters to watch a character swimming in money. That was the real subversion, more than the sex. She wrote herself as the only person in the room with leverage, and Depression audiences, especially women, understood the fantasy perfectly. Off-screen, she was just as calculating, and far more disciplined than the character. She didn't drink, didn't smoke, and put her money into Los Angeles real estate rather than parties. She lived modestly in an apartment at the Ravenswood near Paramount. There is a story from those years that says more about her than any one-liner. She was involved with the boxer William Jones, who was black, and the Ravenswood's management barred him from the building. Her response was to buy the building. Then she lifted the ban. The private life kept its secrets until 1935, when a filing clerk in Milwaukee dug up a marriage certificate from 1911. The press exploded with the news that the screen's great unattainable temptress had a husband. Mae flatly denied it, which was a problem, because it was true. She held the line for 2 years. In July 1937, under oath in a courtroom, she finally admitted that she had married Frank Wallace when she was 17. The divorce did not become final until 1943. That means through her entire Hollywood reign, the woman selling Liberation was legally bound to a song and dance man she had left in 1911. While that was unraveling, a bigger problem was closing in. In 1934, the studios began seriously enforcing the production code, and Mae West was, in a real sense, the reason why. Religious groups held up her films as proof that Hollywood needed policing, and the censors went to work on her scripts line by line. Her 1934 film, Belle of the 90s, was cut to ribbons before release. Klondike Annie in 1936 arrived gutted, and the moral campaign against her in the press turned vicious. Once the censors started cutting, what remained was a middle-aged woman in period costume, repeating a formula the audience already knew by heart. She fought back the only way she knew, by writing lines designed to slip past the readers in the censor's office. Sometimes it worked, since a sentence can be clean on paper and scandalous in her delivery. But the films got tamer with each release, and the audience could feel the leash. Then she made it worse for herself in a single evening. In December 1937, she appeared on the Chase and Sanborn Radio Hour and performed a comedy sketch with Donna Mae, playing Eve in the Garden of Eden. The material was tame by her standards, but her delivery was not, and she flirted outrageously with Edgar Bergen's wooden dummy in a second segment. The reaction was volcanic. Religious organizations flooded NBC with protests. The matter was raised in Washington, and the network barred even the mention of her name on the air. She was effectively banned from American radio for over a decade, locked out of the medium that was then the center of home entertainment. The slide came fast after that. Every Day's a Holiday opened in January 1938 and became her first box office failure. That spring, a group of theater owners named stars who were poison at the box office. Mae West was on the list alongside Katharine Hepburn, Joan Crawford, and Marlene Dietrich. Paramount let her go. Her one big comeback swing came in 1940 at Universal, where she was paired with W.C. Fields in My Little Chickadee. The matchup sounded inspired, two anarchic comics and one Western spoof. In practice, they detested each other. She had written every film she starred in, and now she was forced to share screenplay credit with a co-star she considered an unprofessional drunk. The film made money, and people still enjoy it, but for her it was a humiliation dressed up as a hit. The end of the road was The Heat's On in 1943 at Columbia. For the first time in her film career, she had no real control over the script, and she hated the experience and the result. The picture flopped, and Mae West, just 50 years old, walked away from Hollywood entirely. Most stars in that position negotiate with decline. They take character parts, play mothers, accept smaller billing. Mae refused the entire premise. If the movies would not let her be Mae West, she would go where she could. She went back to the stage, starring on Broadway in 1944 as Catherine the Great in a play she wrote called Catherine Was Great. Critics rolled their eyes and audiences came anyway. Then she revived Diamond Lil in 1949 and toured it for years, playing the same diamond-draped seductress she had created 2 decades earlier. In July 1954, she did the thing that should have been a disaster and somehow wasn't. She opened a nightclub act at the Sahara Hotel in Las Vegas, just shy of 61 years old, surrounded by a chorus of bodybuilders in loincloths. The men flexed, she appraised them like a buyer at auction, and the crowd howled. The genius of the act was that it reversed the oldest arrangement in show business. For once the woman was fully dressed and the men were the scenery. She was doing in 1954 what would be called subversive performance art a few decades later, and she was doing it in a casino lounge. The act was a hit and toured for years. It also rearranged her private life. That same year, her longtime manager and former lover James Timoney died, and one of the muscle men in the show, a former Mr. California-born Chester Rybinski, stepped into the vacuum. He took the name Paul Novak, and he stayed for 26 years. He was around 30 years younger than her, and he became her driver, cook, bodyguard, and nurse, managing her diet after she developed diabetes in 1964. He told people he believed he was put on this earth to take care of Mae West. By every account, he meant it. Through the 50s and 60s, she lived inside the Ravenswood penthouse like a queen in a sealed exhibit. The apartment was white and gold, and a nude statue of herself stood by the piano. She consulted psychics, gave occasional interviews in full character, and watched a new generation discover her old films on television. Something curious happened in those years. The counterculture decided she was one of theirs. To young audiences of the 60s, the woman who had been jailed for a play called Sex looked less like a relic and more like a prophet. The gay community in particular embraced her as an icon, decades before that was safe to say out loud. Then came the comebacks, and this is where the story turns genuinely uncomfortable. In 1970, After 26 years away from the screen, she accepted a part in Myra Breckenridge, the adaptation of Gore Vidal's scandalous novel. She demanded top billing over Raquel Welch, a huge fee, and the right to write her own dialogue, and she got all of it. The film was a legendary catastrophe, savaged by critics and disowned by nearly everyone involved. Mae, who was 76 and playing a predatory talent agent, escaped with the only reviews that could be called affectionate. Audiences cheered her entrance, partly in tribute and partly in disbelief. The film did hand her one genuine victory, though. It put her back on magazine covers and proved her name still sold tickets to the curious. Studios had spent decades telling actresses they expired at 40, and here was a woman drawing crowds in her 70s on pure legend. She should have stopped there. Instead, at 84, she made Sextet, a 1978 musical based on one of her old plays. She played a movie goddess whose honeymoon with a young Timothy Dalton keeps being interrupted by former husbands and world leaders. Tony Curtis, Ringo Starr, and Alice Cooper wandered through it. George Raft, her very first screen co-star, appeared in her very last film at her request. By then, her eyesight and hearing were failing, and she was fed her lines through a radio earpiece hidden under the wig. Curtis later claimed the device sometimes picked up police frequencies, and that she would occasionally recite traffic reports in the middle of a scene. The story may be embellished, but it captures how the production felt to the people on the set. The reviews were merciless, and many treated the film as elder abuse committed by the star against herself. There is another way to see it, though, and it is worth at least entertaining. Mae West had spent her entire life refusing every limit placed on a woman's ambition, and age was simply the last limit on the list. She had built a character who never lost, never aged, and never needed anyone. The tragedy is that the character worked so well there was no longer a person allowed to exist outside it. In her autobiography, she wrote that she had become a star seen in the third person, even to herself. She rarely socialized in the industry, kept no close women friends to speak of, and stayed loyal mostly to her siblings, her psychics, and Novak. Her brother John died in 1964, her sister Beverly struggled with alcohol, and the Ravenswood apartment grew quieter every year. The wisecracks in interviews never changed, which was exactly the problem. Nobody, perhaps including Mae, knew what was underneath them anymore. In August 1980, she fell and suffered a concussion, and at the hospital, she had a stroke. She seemed to rally and was sent home, where private nurses and Novak cared for her. A second stroke came later, and on November 22, 1980, she died in the apartment she had lived in for nearly 50 years. She was 87. They took her home to Brooklyn, and she was buried in the family plot at Cypress Hills Cemetery, beside the mother she had never stopped mourning. Novak guarded her memory for the rest of his own life. He never cashed in with a tell-all, which in Hollywood terms is its own kind of love letter. So what was she, finally? Strip away the camp and the one-liners, and you find something almost nobody noticed at the time. Mae West was a writer. She wrote the plays that made her and the films that saved Paramount. She wrote the persona itself, which may be the most durable piece of fiction American show business ever produced. She was also a businesswoman of cold brilliance. She out-earned every woman in America. During the war, pilots named their inflatable life vests after her, and Salvador Dali turned her lips into a sofa. Few performers have ever dissolved so completely into the culture. She once said that too much of a good thing can be wonderful. Her whole life was the test of that line, and she never once admitted the results.